most horror films leave behind something solid. A name that resurfaces in interviews. A career that continues. A studio willing to acknowledge its role. The films in this episode leave almost nothing. They were not hidden experiments. They were not unfinished reels discovered decades later. They were released openly, sold legally, and watched like any other horror film of their time. And yet, when people try to follow the trail backward, it doesn't fade gradually. It stops. No dependable record of who directed them. No clear history of who wrote them. No actors who went on to recognizable careers. In some cases, not even agreement on which names should appear in the credits. These movies moved through the industry as if everything were normal distribution contracts, copyright notices, video releases, only to reveal years later how little was ever known about their creation. They exist without anchors, without ownership, without anyone left to say, this was our work. Tonight isn't about the stories these films tell. It's about the silence surrounding them. About horror movies that seem detached from authorship itself. Finished, released, and then suspended in a strange state where responsibility disappears. They weren't lost. They weren't erased. They're still here. And the most unsettling question isn't what happens in these films. It's why no one is standing behind them anymore. Do you want me to continue with Fact 15? Fact 13 verse Fact 1. The Dark Side of the Moon, 90. By 1990, horror films were generally well documented. Studios archived press materials, distribution records, and creator information. The Dark Side of the Moon defies those expectations. It was released commercially, carried legitimate copyright information, and circulated through video distributors. Nothing about its release suggests secrecy or irregularity. Yet its origins remain opaque. The director and writers are credited, but their involvement outside this project is limited and inconsistently recorded. The production company appears briefly, then disappears from public records without leaving a trace. Development details are sparse. No clear record of financing or production timelines exists. Behind-the-scenes material is missing, and no consistent narrative connects the film to identifiable creators. Several cast members disappear from records shortly after release. No interviews, no later credits to explain their careers. The Dark Side of the Moon remains a fully released, watchable horror film. Yet its creation is suspended in uncertainty, a reminder that even in the modern era, films can appear without ever revealing who made them. Fact 2. The Majorettes, 1986. The Majorettes emerged during a period of rapid, low-budget horror production. It was distributed, advertised, and made available on home video. Yet attempts to trace its creation reveal only gaps. The director's name appears rarely outside this film. Writers and producers are similarly elusive, with no connected projects or professional context. Their names float in film records with little verification. Production details are contradictory. Sources disagree on filming locations and financing. No behind-the-scenes photographs survive. No accounts exist describing how the movie was assembled. The cast fits the same pattern. Several actors perform key roles, then disappear entirely from the public eye. No interviews, no subsequent roles, no context for their careers. The Majorettes survives as a finished film. Yet the people who made it have stepped away completely. Fact 3. Don't Go to Sleep, 1982. Don't Go to Sleep was produced as a made-for-television horror film, legally broadcast multiple times, complete with official credits and network approval. It reached audiences, was seen widely, and left no question about its existence. Yet its creative history is unusually sparse. The director's career is fragmented with little documentation beyond a few loosely connected projects. The credited writers appear only here, with no clear record of other works or influence on the film's development. No production notes survive. No interviews explain the making of the film. No behind-the-scenes materials connect the broadcast to identifiable creators. Several cast members deliver strong performances and then disappear from the public record. Some appear sporadically elsewhere, others vanish entirely from filmographies. No retrospectives or interviews shed light on their involvement. Don't Go to Sleep exists firmly in broadcast history. It was watched and absorbed into the cultural record. But the human story behind it is incomplete, as if the film persisted, while its creators quietly disappeared. Fact 4: Night of Horror, 1981. Night of Horror remains one of the most difficult films to trace back to a clear human origin. It was released commercially, carried copyright markings, and appeared in video catalogs. On the surface, everything seems normal, but nearly every credit disintegrates under scrutiny. The director's name appears nowhere else. The producers listed have no verified involvement in other projects. Even the production company seems to exist solely in the credits with no traceable corporate history. Production details are inconsistent. Some sources contradict each other. Others omit essential information entirely. The cast disappears after the film's release. No additional roles, no interviews, no evidence of continued involvement in film or television. There are no confirmed production stills, no contemporary articles, no first-hand accounts of how the film was made or financed. Night of Horror exists as a complete film, but the people who created it are absent, leaving it unclaimed in history. Fact 5: The Children, 1980. Released at the start of a decade, dominated by regional horror and drive-in cinema, The Children reached audiences through legitimate distribution channels. It was advertised, screened, and sold on home video. Yet almost everything else about its creation is incomplete. The director's credit leads to a name with no substantial professional history. There is no documented career before or after this film. The same applies to the credited writers and producers, whose involvement appears limited solely to this project. Production details are thin and often contradictory. Sources disagree on shooting locations and financing. No behind-the-scenes photographs survive. No recorded anecdotes provide a timeline of the production. The cast mirrors the disappearance pattern. Several performers appear in key roles and then vanish from public records. No interviews, no follow-up work, no evidence that the project contributed to career advancement. The Children exists as a finished film released into the world, yet detached from the people who created it. Fact 6: The Dorm That Dripped Blood, 1982. On the surface, The Dorm That Dripped Blood looks like a typical early 1980s slasher. It was distributed commercially, released on home video, and even carried alternate titles in some regions. But its human story is nearly impossible to reconstruct. The director's name appears with little to no supporting information. There is no clear career path before or after this project. No interviews survive that detail the production process or offer insight into creative decisions. Writing and production credits are similarly sparse. Some releases list names that cannot be traced elsewhere. Other versions reduce or rearrange credits, suggesting edits made without documentation or oversight. The production company itself seems to have existed solely to release this one film. No additional projects, no traceable personnel, no corporate record beyond a single line in the credits. The cast reinforces this sense of disappearance. Several actors appear in leading roles, then vanish from filmographies. No press coverage, no retrospective accounts, no indication that the release led to further opportunities. The Dorm That Dripped Blood survives intact and watchable. Its images endure. But the people who made it appear to have stepped away entirely, leaving behind a horror film that no one ever claimed. Fact 7: The Being, 1983. The Being occupies an uneasy space between documentation and uncertainty. It was released publicly, carried proper copyright notices, and circulated through standard distribution channels. On the surface, it appears to be a normal low-budget horror title of its era, but attempts to trace its creation quickly dissolve into ambiguity. The director's name appears inconsistently across sources, sometimes accompanied by conflicting information. The production company credited for the film has no clear history beyond this single release. Accounts of the film's development are vague. There are no confirmed production timelines, no detailed financing records, and no preserved material explaining how the project moved from concept to completion. The cast provides little clarity. Several actors seem to have no verifiable filmography beyond this appearance. There are no interviews or personal accounts placing the film within a broader career. The Being exists with just enough information to confirm that it is real. but not enough to explain who brought it into existence. It lingers as a finished horror movie whose human origins remain unresolved, suspended between presence and absence. Fact 8. The Mutilator, 1984. At first glance, The Mutilator appears to be a typical mid-1980s slasher released during a period when such films were produced rapidly and distributed aggressively. It carried alternate titles, moved through multiple distributors, and found an audience through home video. Yet its origins remain strangely fragmented. The director's identity stands isolated. Outside of this project, there is little verifiable evidence of a sustained filmmaking career. Accounts of the production vary depending on the source, with timelines and creative roles often failing to align. Credits shift across different releases. Some emphasize different producers. Others list names that cannot be reliably connected to any other projects, creating an unstable picture of who was actually involved. The cast follows a familiar pattern of disappearance. Several performers appear prominently and then leave no discernible trace in film or television. No interviews exist reflecting on the experience. No later credits clarify where their careers went. What remains is a technically finished horror film paired with a fractured backstory. It circulated successfully, yet left behind no consistent narrative of how it came together. The Mutilator doesn't feel forgotten. It feels disconnected, as though its past was never meant to be preserved. Fact 9. The Slayer, 1982. When The Slayer appeared in the early 1980s, it looked like a standard entry in the slasher boom. It had promotional art distribution and a presence in the home video market that suggested nothing out of the ordinary. Its history tells a different story. The director's name is tied almost entirely to this film. There is no clear path leading into the project and almost nothing that follows it. No interviews survive that explain the creative process or how the film was shaped. The same absence surrounds the credited writers and producers. Their names exist, but without context. No other screenplays, no collaborations, no identifiable careers that connect them to a larger creative world. Details about the production itself are vague and often contradictory. There are no consistent accounts of where the film was shot or how long production lasted. Behind-the-scenes material is virtually non-existent, leaving no visual evidence of a functioning crew. The cast reinforces the pattern. Several actors play major roles, then disappear from film records entirely. No follow-up performances, no retrospectives, no public reflections on the film's release. The Slayer survives as a complete horror movie, still accessible decades later. But the people who made it seem to have stepped away the moment it was finished, leaving behind a film without a visible human signature. Fact 10. The Prey, 1983. The Prey entered the early 1980s horror market, quietly appearing on video shelves, without the promotional footprint most films left behind. It had a distributor, it had packaging, it reached audiences, but almost everything else about it resists reconstruction. The director's credit leads to minimal information beyond this single title. Production company details vary across sources, sometimes contradicting one another, sometimes offering nothing more than a name with no history. Credits themselves are inconsistent. Some versions list roles that others omit. In certain cases, key creative positions seem to shift or disappear entirely, suggesting that the film passed through multiple hands without any of them leaving a stable record. The cast follows the same familiar pattern. Several performers appear in central roles, then vanish from filmographies. There are no interviews, no public reflections, and no clear indication that they continued working in entertainment. There is no reliable documentation explaining how The Prey was financed or where it was shot. No behind-the-scenes material survives to anchor it to a specific time or place. The Prey remains a finished, viewable horror film released, distributed, and consumed. Yet its creation feels untethered, as if the movie entered circulation without anyone intending to stay behind and answer questions about how it came to be. Fact 11. Shadow Play, 86. Shadow Play exists as a complete horror film with almost no visible connection to a creative community. It was released commercially, listed in catalogs, and circulated like any other legitimate genre title of its era. There is no question that it exists. The question is who made it. The director's name appears only in relation to this film. There is no documented career before it, and no confirmed work afterward. The same pattern applies to the credited writers and producers whose names surface briefly and then vanish from film history. What makes shadow play especially unsettling is the lack of supporting material. There are no known production photographs, no behind-the-scenes accounts, no interviews or anecdotes explaining how the project came together. Even basic production details remain unclear. There are no confirmed shooting locations, no documented financing sources, no preserved records that connect the finished film to a group of identifiable creators. The film feels sealed off from context, not just narratively, but historically. It exists in isolation, as if it were released into the world without ever being fully claimed by the people who made it. Fact 12. The Lamp, also known as The Outing, 1987. At first, The Lamp appears to be one of the more traceable titles on this list. It had a recognizable release circulated widely on VHS and even existed under 2 official names. But the closer its history is examined, the less stable that identity becomes. Credits shift depending on which version of the film is consulted. Some releases emphasize one set of names, others quietly rearrange or downplay them. The production company credited in certain prints seems to exist only long enough to release this single film, then disappears without leaving behind a record of other projects or personnel. Information about the director and writer is fragmented and often contradictory. Different databases disagree on basic details, and no clear creative path surrounds the film either before or after its release. It's difficult to determine who actually guided the project from start to finish. The cast raises similar questions. Several actors appear in prominent roles, yet leave little trace beyond this appearance. There are no interviews, no retrospective commentary, and no evidence that the film served as a stepping stone to further work. The Lamp survives as a finished product under multiple identities. Its images are intact. Its story is complete. But the people behind it feel interchangeable, unstable, and ultimately absent, as if the film itself mattered more than whoever happened to assemble it. Fact 13. The Dark Power, 1985. By all measurable standards, The Dark Power is a legitimate horror film. It was copyrighted, distributed, and sold during the VHS era like countless others. Yet its creation feels strangely hollow. The director's credit leads to a name with no clear history. No body of work surrounds the film. No interviews or reflections explain its existence. The production company appears briefly and then dissolves into obscurity. It leaves behind no trail of projects, no creative identity, and no record of continued operation. The cast exists only within the boundaries of the film itself. Several actors seem to have no careers beyond this appearance. There are no follow-ups, no acknowledgments, and no voices reclaiming the work. There is no behind-the-scenes documentation to anchor the film to a place or time. No production photos, no oral history, no preserved memory of how it came together. The Dark Power stands as a complete horror film with an incomplete origin. It was released into the world, then severed from the people who made it a reminder that some films survive longer than their creators' identities. Fact 14. The Intruder, 1975. The Intruder emerged during the mid-1970s, a period when low-budget horror films flooded regional theaters and drive-ins. On the surface, it fits neatly into that landscape. Its history does not. The director's credit leads nowhere. Databases list the name but provide no background, no additional projects, and no explanation of how the film came into being. The writing credits are just as isolated, detached from any broader creative record. Production details vary depending on the source. Some list a company that cannot be verified elsewhere. Others omit production information entirely, leaving only the distributor that handled its release. The actors are equally difficult to trace. The lead performer delivers a substantial role, yet has no identifiable career beyond this film. There are no interviews, no archival photographs, and no documented reflections on the production. There is no clear record of a premiere. No preserved reviews tied to identifiable critics. Only fragments remain, posters, listings, and the film itself. The Intruder feels less like a project that emerged from a creative environment and more like something that slipped quietly into circulation without leaving behind the people who made it. a horror film that exists fully on screen but barely exists anywhere else. Fact 15, The Killing Hour, 1982. At a glance, The Killing Hour appears indistinguishable from many early 1980s horror releases. It was distributed commercially circulated on VHS and carried the outward markings of a legitimate genre film. But once its origins are examined, the film begins to lose definition. The director's name surfaces only in connection with this title. There is no documented career before it, and no confirmed work afterward. The screenwriter follows the same pattern, appearing briefly in the credits and nowhere else in film history. Even the production trail feels unstable. Different releases list different companies, some of which cannot be traced beyond this single film. In other versions, those credits disappear entirely, leaving only a distributor with no public account of how the project originated. The cast offers little clarity. Several actors appear in central roles, then vanish from filmography records. No interviews exist, no retrospectives, no indication that the film led to further opportunities. What remains is a finished horror movie with no reliable human context. It passed through the industry, reached audiences, and then detached itself from anyone who might have claimed authorship. The Killing Hour wasn't forgotten. It was released and then left without witnesses. Bonus: these films expose a hidden truth about horror history. There was a time when movies could be made, released, and absorbed into culture without anyone ever intending to be remembered. Names were optional. Documentation was fragile. Authorship was disposable. What remains are films without anchors. They exist without context, without lineage, without anyone left to say, "This was mine." They weren't erased. They weren't censored. They were simply allowed to drift. And that raises a final question. If a horror film can survive without a known origin, how many others are still out there, real, released, and disconnected from their creators? If you've ever watched a movie that felt like it came from nowhere, share it below. Because somewhere in the shadows of cinema, there are still films waiting not to be discovered, but to be claimed.